Welcome back to my channel. There has not been any real dramatic changes in our real estate market since last week. No market crash, but there was a crash with Netflix last night. If you watched that Jake Paul-Mike Tyson fight, there were over 900,000 complaints from viewers about all kinds of buffering problems because Netflix got overwhelmed. There were so many viewers watching that fight last night, and it was something else. We're going to talk a little bit about that today and how some of the things in the market with loans and interest rates and how the market's moving right now can correlate with some of that fight we saw last night. So I'm bringing on our famous lender again from Glendale, California, Dave Sousa. Dave, welcome back to the channel once again, pal.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Always good to be with you.
Absolutely. Did you see that fight last night, Dave?
I did not. I did not actually. I missed it.
In the whole country that didn't see the fight.
I must have been the only person in Glendale that missed it.
Somebody had to be in the office working late, I guess. All right. So anyways, you didn't miss a whole lot, to be honest with you, unless you wanted to watch a spectacle and, some crazy promotion and things of that nature. But the fight itself, as far as a boxing match, no boxing match.
Well, I'll tell you, with a little bit of sidebar here, you having been a fighter at one point, I'm sure people will be very curious to know what your take on the fight was.
Okay. All right. Well, my take on that fight last night, on the actual fight, between who won, Jake Paul or Tyson. Jake Paul won the fight by the judges' scorecards last night. They only did 8 rounds. They were 2-minute rounds, and there were larger gloves than normal. I'm not quite sure what the gloves' weight were. They're probably 12 ounces, I bet. Kind of like something a lot of people, 12 to 16 ounces is what people wear when they're sparring, training, a little more padding on it. But when they fight, typically it's a 10-ounce glove, and sometimes the promotion will go down to an 8-ounce glove, which is crazy, but usually 10 ounce. So they had a heavier glove, shorter rounds, 8 rounds. So it wasn't really like a title fight or anything like that. That'd be a 12-round fight. But Jake Paul looked very amateurish to me at best. And Tyson looked like he just wasn't even there. He looked like he was off in space somewhere, to be honest with you. He was gnawing on his gloves when he had his fists up in that Tyson typical style like this, moving back and forth. His speed back and forth was off, and he was chewing on his gloves. And when asked about that in the interview afterwards...
Did you just say he was chewing on his gloves?
Yes. Yeah, you could see him. He was actually gnawing on his gloves like that. And he said that he had a biting fetish. Everyone knows about how he bit off Evander Holyfield's tip of his ear when he was fighting Holyfield back in the day. So, yeah, I mean, a little Hannibal Lecter in the house. I'm not sure what's going on there, Mike. But anyways, love Mike Tyson, one of my favorite fighters of all time. I don't know who cannot agree with that, right? But just he's 58. And I've got to be honest, I don't think it's because he's 58. 58 is not that old today. It really isn't. But he just didn't look there. He looked checked out, in my opinion. He looked great in the training, but stepping into the ring for the fight, he looked like he was checked out in a whole other world at that point. So it's too bad we can't talk too much about it. You didn't see it. So anyways, that was my take on the fight. Great promotion. Jake Paul, $40 million for the fight. Mike Tyson, $20 million. There was a lot of money changing hands there last night. And the promotion, I don't even know what those numbers are.
So $60 million push between both fighters.
Correct. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Big stuff. So going to be interesting to see what happens next with Jake Paul. I'm pretty sure Mike Tyson, I don't think he's going to be returning to the ring. Hopefully not, because it would just be obviously for another payday. But how does this relate to our real estate market, Dave? That fight last night. I mean, just a messy market that we've had. We've had this choppy market. So I could say maybe how the interest rates have been volatile, and we've had some ugly rates for quite a while, like that ugly fight we saw last night.
Well, in the same way that the fight ended up being unexpectedly tame, there have been a lot of unexpected reactions in the market. Case in point, in September, the Fed cut rates by a 0.5 point.
Right.
And unexpectedly, rates went up.
Back up, yeah.
The election happened, last week, not last week, but week before last.
Right.
And ever since the election, rates have drifted up. So I think the thing that you could say they had in common was results that were unexpected. Everyone, judging by the number of viewers, I'm sure everybody expected it to be a hell of a fight.
Right.
And based on what your analysis is, especially from someone who has fought professionally before, your take on it was relatively tame.
Yeah, and messy. It was a big mess. Relatively tame and messy. So I guess that could be something correlate a little bit with what our market's been like lately. So, well, let's get into what are you seeing with interest rates? I know everybody's always dying to know what our interest rates are as of today. I know you've got a rate that's usually a little bit better than what's national averages out there. Where are you at right now with your interest rates, Dave?
Well, as an example, this last week, the week before last was obviously the election, and then on the heels of the election, Fed Chair Powell spoke, and the Federal Reserve made their quarter point drop for the November meeting.
Right.
Now, this last week that just went by, we had two very important indices come out, which are critical to the Fed's decision on what they're going to do with rates, and they're both inflation related.
Right.
Wednesday was the CPI, which is Consumer Price Index. Mm-hmm. That came in fairly where expected. It was marginally to a hair above, but pretty much where expected. And then Thursday, the PPI, Producer Price Index, came in a hair above expected. Those two together, combined with U.S. retail sales on Friday, didn't help the stock market very well at all. So here's the synopsis of what happened with the markets last week. Interest rates ended the week relatively almost dead flat to where they were Friday of the previous week.
Dead flat, okay.
Minimal change. So par rate around 6.5, 6.625 for us, somewhat higher with the rest of the market. On the flip side,
can you elaborate on that a little bit, Dave? The par rate 6.5 to 6.625.
Yes.
Can you explain to people what that par means?
Well, par means a rate where you're not paying anything to buy down the interest rate. That's pretty much par pricing is the interest rate at cost. So if you wanted to buy down the interest rate, you could certainly buy it down below that by paying points, as we've discussed before. But without spending any money to buy down the interest rate and just taking what we call a par rate, where you're not buying down the rate at primary residential, which we're aggressively priced, you're looking at about an average 6.5 to 6.6% rate at par. Now, on the flip side of the market, whereas the stock market had substantial gains the prior week following the election, we saw some loss this last week, especially during Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, after the PPI and the CPI came out, and then with retail sales on Friday, along with comments. There were a lot of Federal Reserve Open Market Committee members that spoke on Friday at various different venues, and the markets must not have been particularly fond of what they heard, because the stock market ended up about 2 to 3% down from where it was the previous week. One of the stocks that weighed heavily on that was Tesla, because Tesla, with Elon Musk and his support of the incoming president-elect Trump, right after the election, Tesla stock shot up like very, very substantially. The latter part of this week, Tesla stock cooled off a little bit, went from its highs down to something that was still very good for Tesla stock, but off of its highs. So when you put all that together, the stock market as a whole ended up somewhat softer this week, about 2 to 3% down from where it was the previous week. Still doing well, but not quite as well as it was the Friday of the previous week.
Okay. All right. Well, speaking of Fed cuts, the next one coming up in December, I follow an analyst a group of analysts that actually come out with a kind of a ratio that where they feel will be a cut or no cut. And the ratio they've got is 80-20 right now for a Fed cut.
A quarter point cut, yeah.
Yeah, quarter point cut.
Correct.
So 80% of these people on this poll are feeling, yes, there will be a Fed cut of a quarter point. About 20% are feeling there will be no Fed cut. So
correct.
Pretty strong leaning towards yes, another quarter point Fed cut coming up. I think that's definitely going to help our fourth quarter here going into December. And I think that the markets could use that. I mean, we're picking up a little bit. It seems like a little optimism. Election's over, regardless of who's won, right? I think that then that's done. Everyone kind of has a general idea of where the market's going or where the world's going. So then the confidence picks up naturally, right?
Now, just as a comment on that, right, wrong, or indifferent, and this is not my opinion or yours, this is more of Wall Street's opinion. Wall Street as a whole, based on its reaction, stocks viewed the election results as favorable.
Very good, yeah.
Whether they're right or wrong or whatever happens in the future remains to be seen. But
Yeah.
Wall Street for stocks viewed the outcome of the election as a positive outcome. You
Absolutely.
can see that by the fact that stocks have rallied to highs since the election. On the flip side of the coin, rates, bonds and rates have gone the other way. On the flip side of the coin, bonds and rates, sorry about that. On the flip side of the coin, bonds and rates have actually lost ground since the election. And Wall Street's interpretation of that, right, wrong, or indifferent, is that a Trump presidency with the Republican Party in at least one of the chambers, if not both, could conceivably lead towards deficit spending and or tax cuts, which ultimately would not help inflation. And if it doesn't help inflation and inflation creeps up, that is going to cause the Fed to have concern about not just lowering rates, but even possibly raising rates to offset climbing inflation. Now, again, all of this is speculation and nobody knows what the truth will actually be.
Exactly.
But moving forward, I think
Okay,
the broad overview would be that a Trump/Republican presidency and Congress is favored by the stock market and is driving a little bit of concern within the bond market and interest rates.
Right. And with all those things being said too, throw in tariffs. There's a lot of discussion about Trump's ideas and how he wants to work with tariffs and different ideas with that going forward. So there's people who say that's going to affect our economy in different ways with inflation, and others that say no, it's going to improve it. So it's like, here we go again. I don't know what the true answer is because I really don't have that much knowledge on tariffs. But
I can tell you this: Wall Street, and again, this is not mine or your particular view, but Wall Street's interpretation is that in general, tariffs are not good for inflation because what tariffs do is they raise the cost of things.
Mm-hmm.
So if there is something, whether it's tariffs or anything else, COVID, anything that has the potential to cause prices to go up,
Mm-hmm.
that is a concern for inflation. So
I
don't know if this is actually going to happen, but if tariffs were to be imposed, whatever other results they may have, Wall Street seems to perceive that this would not be good for inflation and in turn would not be good for interest rates.
How much faith do you put in Wall Street, Dave?
That's a good question. A lot of times I refer to the traders on Wall Street as Chicken Little. And when I say that, meaning the story of Chicken Little is this: there's a little bit of ray of sunshine in the yard, and they automatically think that means, okay, this is great. We're gonna have warm, sunny weather, and they go running out to the yard.
Right.
And that would mean investing, right? Investing in stocks. The slightest cloud cover, and they immediately go running back to the coop. In other words, Wall Street doesn't typically move slowly. They tend to be very reactive. They tend to panic easily. They tend to get excited very easily. So, while their overview and their flavor may not necessarily jive with what I think should be the reaction, unfortunately, Wall Street's reaction is what is going to drive the eventual thing, prices. Wall Street's reaction is going to drive stocks. Wall Street's reaction is going to drive bonds and subsequently drive interest rates. So whether or not I agree with or disagree with Wall Street's reaction to economic data that comes out, their behavior, Wall Street's reaction absolutely affects both the stock and bond markets and in turn interest rates.
Dave, who controls the 10-year on this? Because we got about a 4.414 as of the other day on this. What drives and controls the 10-year Treasury? Which is what more.
Well, there's nobody that controls the 10-year. I'll tell you what the 10-year yield is driven by.
What pushes it one way or the other?
Right. So the 10-year yield is the yield on 10-year Treasury notes, and it is inversely relational to the prices of 10-year Treasury notes. Typically, 10-year Treasury notes interest rates tend to follow the yields on 10-year Treasury notes. So as an example, when Wall Street is in a mood where they are favoring bonds, they're looking for security, they feel like the economic data is good for interest rates, then what's going to end up happening is they will buy bonds, bond prices go up, bond yields go down, and that means the 10-year treasury yield will go down, which ultimately means interest rates will follow that down.
Yeah.
On the flip side, if there's a concern about inflation, that will in turn cause traders to pay less money and the prices of bonds go down. That means bond yields go up and interest rates go up.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
it's not so basically what drives the 10-year yield are the prices that traders are paying for 10-year treasury notes.
Right. Okay.
And that is determined by the trader's appetite for, or lack thereof, for 10-year treasury notes.
Dave, I wanted to share too, what I do like what Trump's doing is he's talking about interest rates already. I don't know if you heard a couple of days ago, he had said that credit card rates have got to come down to 10% ceiling. No more 22, no more 25% rates on credit cards. It's ridiculous. It's like mobsters running these deals with credit cards right now. If you're borrowing money on credit cards, he's going to call a 10% cap for a ceiling on credit cards. Let's see if that happens. But that's what he was just saying a couple of days ago. Did you catch news of that?
Well, no, I haven't, but I'll tell you this much. And historically, politicians make a lot of warrants. I will tell you that whether it's their Democratic or Republican president, they have little to no control over what happens with the interest rates as far as credit card goes. So,
Right.
And this is not a partisan comment. This is not a Trump or Republican or Democratic comment. This is specifically interest rates are controlled by the Federal Reserve.
Right.
And what Jerome Powell said point blank in his last press conference, the decisions that the Federal Reserve makes are driven by data.
Yeah. So
they are not driven by the judicial branch. They are not driven by the executive branch. They are not driven by the legislative branch. They are completely independent of all of that. And so while it may be great for, politicians historically have made claims about what they will or won't do with interest rates.
Right.
And it almost never, I've never seen it happen. I've never seen a politician be able to fulfill the promises they've made on interest rates because the politicians themselves have no control at all. What actually controls the interest rates is the bonds and the prices of bonds, which are driven by data, and it has everything to do with traders' flavor and traders' appetite for either purchasing or not purchasing bonds.
Right, Dave. So
I mean, would I love to see interest rates on credit cards come down to 10%? Absolutely. Do I think that's going to happen anytime in yours and my lifetime? Possibly, but it'll have little or nothing to do with anything administrative related or to do with the executive branch.
Okay, Dave. So talking about data, what the Fed is going to make his decisions off what the data is saying. So what the president can do, or the administration completely, is try to control the data or the effects of the data or how the data will be coming out based on probably the jobs numbers, inflationary numbers, everything that's going to affect the Fed's decision going forward, looking at data. It's going to be their job to control the data input coming into the Fed so he can make his decision going forward, right?
Well, respectfully, the data that the Fed uses, again, has little or nothing to do with any of the three branches of government. Now, if there are branches of the government that are skewing the data, that's a whole separate conversation, and that's not appropriate. The data that comes out, the data that's released, this is what drives the Fed decisions.
Mm-hmm.
It's the jobs data,
unemployment,
employment, jobs, jobless claims, everything to do with the jobs market and the strength of the jobs market.
Right.
And then there's three other indices that drive what the Fed looks at. Two of them came out this week, the CPI and the PPI, which are both consumer and producer price indices for inflation.
Right.
The third one, which we discussed last time, is what's called the PCE. And you and I talked about that with the personal consumption expenditures, meaning what are people spending? The Fed, that's actually the Fed's most preferred gauge to make their decisions on what they're going to do with interest rates is the PCE, the personal consumption expenditures. What are families spending on groceries, on utilities, on cars, on housing? And if you recall from our last conversation, that is also tied into consumer sentiment, because the stronger that consumers feel about the economy, the more likely they are to spend money on it. And that data, those three indices combined with the data on the jobs market, is what drives the Fed decisions. Again, to your point, the data comes out, the data is what the data is. Now, there have been revisions to, corrections to whatever degree the federal government does or doesn't control or manipulate the data that comes out. I'm not in a position to comment. From where I sit, my hope is that the data that's coming out is accurate and the Fed makes its decision based on that data. From what I understand, there is very little that either the executive, the judicial, or the legislative branch has to, or at least that they're supposed to have to manipulate that data.
Well, let's agree on this, Dave. It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out with different data and new data coming into the Fed.
Absolutely.
So this most powerful man in the planet, the Fed, could actually make decisions on how he's going to read and interpret that data and make decisions going forward, which affect not just the United States, but the whole world, basically.
And beyond that, too, he is the voice. But don't forget, there are seven, I believe it's seven people that make up the actual Federal Open Market Committee.
Right.
And when he comes forward and makes a decision, similar to the Supreme Court,
Sure,
Roberts might come out and actually voice the decision, but there's a vote that happens within the community, within the committee. And so obviously if they're talking about an interest rate hike or an interest rate cut or how much to cut or raise it by, if they've got seven people, there's always going to be a majority.
right.
And the Federal Open Market Committee is composed of these seven people. And of course, Jerome Powell is the chair. And so ultimately, he may have some sway within the committee, sorry. But at the end of the day, the decisions that he voices to us, the consumers and the American public, are a decision that is made by the committee as a whole.
Exactly. Well, thank you for that. So I want to get into another gentleman, a chief economist of the National Association of Realtors, Mr. Lawrence Yun, has made a few comments on what he speculates is going to happen for 2025. I know a lot of people are wondering what this gentleman is saying about going forward into 2025. And here's some of the things he'd come out with just recently here. He's predicting a rise in home sales for 2025, right? I think we all kind of feel that coming on too.
I'd say from his mouth to God's ears.
Right. Yun expects a 9% year-over-year increase in existing home sales. Okay, existing home sales are your resale homes, right? Then we're going to talk new construction, potentially adding up with the existing home sales, potentially adding up to 400,000 new transactions. For new home sales, Yun anticipates an even more substantial growth, projecting 547,000 units sold of new construction for 2025. Existing home sales to rise by 13% in 2026, while new home sales will increase by 8%. So 13% for the resale sales you've got for 2026 and an 8% growth increase for new construction in 2026. So 2025 is shaping up to look pretty good. Improvement. 2026 even more so. Pricing or home values. His predictions or speculations for home values for 2025 is a modest 2%. Modest 2% for 2025. And then he rolls into 2026, sticking to his guns with another modest 2% increase in value in 2026. So
interesting. Good data.
2 to 3% seems to be kind of the average, basically more like 3%. So still growth, still price increases, but seems to be more modest. And that might be because he's planning on trying to keep a hold on that ceiling coming up on home values anymore, right? So, and we're going to see interest rates come down. I think you and I can both agree on that. I think I have a strong feeling we're going to see that 6% number. I don't know if we'll dip down into the fives, maybe for a little bit. It's probably going to have its little volatile game back and forth, but let's talk real quick about that, Dave. What are your thoughts about rates going into 2025?
Well, I'll tell you this. One of the things I've learned with the interest rate market is it's always a gamble. And there are so many different things that affect it, and the traders, as I've mentioned, or on Wall Street that trade bonds, and that's what basically drives yields and rates. They're so skittish. My hope and my feeling is that as we continue to get a control and a hold on inflation, we should see an improvement in rates.
Okay.
The concern I have is going into the next year, 2, 3, depending on what fiscal policies the new administration puts in and how they affect inflation, that will absolutely have an effect on interest rates. The key is, even with the jobs market staying strong, the key is for interest rates to come down, inflation has to continue to move down.
Right. Yeah.
If
Correct.
there's anything that happens that starts to nudge inflation back up, we will not see a reduction in interest rates. We won't,
Okay.
because the Federal Reserve will immediately take a step back and say, wait a minute, we had restrictive policy, it's brought rates down, but for whatever reason, prices are starting to trickle back up.
Right.
And it's all going to be data driven. I will tell you, and this is just my interpretation of Wall Street's interpretation. Typically, for lack of a better expression, typically a Democratic administration, which is more liberal when it comes to certain things, and even when it comes to spending, etc. Some of the policies that they have with respect to how it would affect inflation and keep inflation in check, or at least not keep things in check, typically rates will tend to improve. And the concern about having a philosophy where there's a potential increase in inflation, such as deficit spending, that is a concern that would drive inflation up, which would eventually drive interest rates up. Again, my hope is that we will see inflation continue to be brought under control. My hope is that the new administration coming in will do whatever it can to prevent inflation from going up. And as a matter of fact, with any help bring inflation down, that will bring interest rates down.
So real quick to add to that, I'm hearing what you're saying with your history here on the Democrats and whether it's, again, conservative, Democratic, whatever it is. We just had Democrats in the office for 4 years, or we still do actually today. And isn't that where our inflation went up to over 9%?
Well, yeah, but again, not to turn this into a political conversation, but the 9% that we saw in inflation had more to do with COVID than anything. COVID was absolutely rampant. It cut supply chains down substantially. Prices went through the roof. And as we've always talked about, when you see an imbalance between supply and demand, whenever you have an imbalance in supply and demand, especially when you have a high demand and low supply, that drove inflation up like we haven't seen in a very, very long time.
Right.
And now, over the last, at least the last 2 years, we have seen a substantial, during the last 2 years of the Democratic administration, we have seen a substantial reduction in inflation, coming from 9% down to in the 2.
Yeah.
And my concern is, okay, we've seen a dramatic drop in inflation from, let's say, 9% to in the mid to upper 2s. I'm really hopeful that we can get that number, because what the Fed's looking for is to get that number closer to 2%.
Gotcha.
And regardless of administration, what's going to drive that down to 2% is keeping inflation, keeping prices where they're supposed to be, not having prices go up.
And aren't we
since we've seen such an improvement in inflation?
Are we about 2.1% right now for inflation?
I'm not sure exactly where we are, but we're somewhere between, somewhere in the 2.5%, because there's core inflation and then there's inflation, right? And core strips out food and energy. So overall, we're at a number that is somewhat higher than where the Fed wants to see it, but drastically better than where we were at the peak.
Gotcha.
So I'm really hopeful that regardless of the flavor or Republican or Democrat administration that may be, I'm really hopeful that as a whole, we're able to see inflation come down. And I'm
You
hopeful
need,
that the
you need both.
policies that whatever
Absolutely.
administration it is, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise, I'm very hopeful that the policies that they implement will be supportive of bringing inflation down
Yeah.
and not making inflation go up. Because if inflation goes up, and mark my words, if inflation starts to go back up, there's no hope for interest rates.
No, I got you. Rates will go up as well. So, Dave, let me ask you something. As you can see, I've got my golden crystal ball here with me
I see
again.
that.
Okay. So I'm gonna, there's our asterisk for you. I'm gonna ask you a question. Let's talk like our audience is not here listening to us right now, right? We've got the golden crystal ball we're looking at. What do you feel rates are going to do, honestly, for 2025? I know
I might have said previously that I would see them continue to improve into maybe the mid fives. I would say at this particular point, just based on overall assessment, I'm hopeful that they will get down to the 6-ish mark.
Okay, so low six or six, or would we go into a high five?
I'm gonna say at this point, if they get down to the low 6s to 6%, I'll be fairly happy with that.
Well,
Previously, I might have thought we might have seen numbers in the mid fives, maybe even low fives. Again, anything is possible, right? Because it all depends on what happens. If the economy slows down, if the jobs market weakens, if prices continue to come down and we don't see an increase in prices, that will absolutely help rates. And then we could hope for rates in the high fives. But if again, it's all data dependent. If the jobs market stays strong, if prices don't come down, or if, God forbid, prices start to drift up, then we're going to move in the opposite direction.
Gotcha. I'm going to put my crystal ball away real quick here. But before I do, I want to ask you one more question, because a lot of people still wonder if they're going to wait around for that 2.5% or 3% interest rate comeback that happened during COVID. And what I would like to say, please understand this: if our rates are going to go back down to a 2.5% or a 3% historically low interest rate in all of the history of our country, right? Something catastrophic is going to happen. It's going to be horrible. Something really bad like COVID, or even worse, or war. That's going
and think about that. What happened right before interest rates hit that low? What drove those interest rates to get to where they were was a worldwide disaster.
Correct. Yes. That's
so
my point.
If there's anybody waiting for a rate in the 2s and 3s, I would say respectfully, you're going to be waiting a very, very, very long time. You may be waiting an indefinitely long period of time.
And then what? Speaking as humans, when that happens, something catastrophic happens, something dangerous and scary and unknown happens. What do most people do? Do they go out and buy nice, big, beautiful homes? No. They
stop spending.
They retract. They hide things. They're conserving. They're holding up, because we don't know what's going to happen. There's too much unknown out there. So think about that. You might be waiting around for all this crazy rates that are probably never going to happen again unless something really bad happens, as I said, and then you probably won't buy anyways at that time. So who knows if you got that kind of gusto in you to do that, right? So, but let's move on from that. Let's get out of the interest rate talk. I'm going to put the crystal ball away for now, but it's right over here. If anybody really wants to ask some deep questions, we could go right to the crystal ball again. I want to tell you a little interesting thing. I had discovered some notes with FSBOs, right? For sale by owner, right? They're still out there. People are still trying to sell homes by themselves without a real estate agent. Some interesting numbers I found that it's actually decreased a little bit. It was at about 89% of all homes were sold with the real estate agent in the United States. Right now, it's up to 90%. So that's the FSBO numbers have decreased a little bit, and those using an agent have increased a little bit more as of late. Some of the numbers here were pretty interesting. And then again, out of that, let's say 10% of homes that are selling by themselves for sale by owner, a large majority of those sales are with somebody they already know in the family. So it's really not that they're selling their house. They're just transferring the house really to someone else in the family or a very close good friend. Another portion of that, besides that, is manufactured in mobile homes. Makes up another portion of the for sale by owners, right? So there's some interesting numbers. Now you got about 5% of those are your detached single family homes, is what I was reading. For sale by owners across the board sell for less. And a lot of that can be attributed to selling it to family members. Maybe they're selling it for just, what it's comping out at. And they figure out a value, probably going to Zillow. Okay, his estimates, right? But Zillow's estimates are off often. They've got an 8% flex one way or the other, is what Zillow says. That's just what Zillow says. So, but anyway, so the for sale by owner average sale price across the United States, right, definitely fluctuates drastically between different states. But geographically speaking, 380,000 is your average sold price for sale by owner. Okay, with an agent, that same type of house, 435,000. So from 380 to 435, right there. You're leaving a lot of money on the table, selling it by yourself and taking it on. There's a lot involved. The average number that the perception of people have that an agent puts into a transaction, meaning to sell a home or to buy a home, representing them selling a home or buying a home, the overall hours at or perception of the public was there was about 15 hours of work that they put into that home. 15 hours. So somebody had ran some real deep analytics on this, right? I mean, this took a while, quite a study. They came up with 87 to 100 hours per transaction is what an agent actually really does work. And I would agree with that number wholeheartedly. I don't have to think about it. Could be even more. Depends on how difficult the property is, or if it fell out of escrow, you had to go back again. You got to keep looking at properties. There is so much involved. So if you're going to take on selling your home by yourself and you want to tackle that, there's a lot of things to look at, consider. We could always make sure we get you some information to look at. Of course, you can find it on Google. Mr. Google will provide you all kinds of great statistics and information on that. Look it up. You'll see what I'm talking about. So how did for sale by owners come up with the value on their house, the listing price? Such an important, maybe one of the most important parts of the whole puzzle is coming up with the price you're going to list your house at. And what is the price you're going to actually accept on that sale? Because you don't want to give it away, right? You don't want to leave money on the table. But then again, if you price it too high, or what a lot of people call aspirational pricing, you'll sit on the market. DOM, days on market, goes up. The longer you're on the market, the things become more challenging for you to get the price you're looking for, right? That's where these price adjustments, which are usually down, you don't see a lot of price adjustments up. The only way that happens is if somebody appraised higher or they sold higher and they made an adjustment. That's what that means. So some people see that, go, hey, I see prices are going up. No, that's not what that means. You'll see a little green arrow on MLS, but you'll see 90% of price adjustments are down in red. Okay, I see it all the time. So I'm just going to finish this up here real quick. 40% of people got their valuations for their home with an appraisal. They hired an appraiser to come out and tell them what their home was worth. One thing I want to share with you about that.
Did you say 40%?
40% of for sale by owners got the valuation by hiring an appraiser to come out to the house and appraise the house. The challenge with that, yes, you're going to get an appraised value, but they're not working for the bank. When the appraiser is hired by you, they are not working for the bank. When they're doing an appraisal for the bank, they want to make sure they're really crossing those T's and dotting those I's, working very hard to bring in the value. So if an appraisal is this, but you get into escrow at that, right, because the numbers and the market's moving and jumping, the inventory's lower, you got demand, supply is low, demand is strong, you're a lot of times going to get this price over this appraised value. And then the appraiser's job, working for the bank, is to bring that appraisal to make sense. Does this make sense? A lot of times they can bring that in, but there's times when they can't, and then we have an appraisal problem, right?
Well, and also to your point, if I may just interject, appraisal is more of an art than it is a science. So if you're asking an appraiser to appraise your house, but there's no sales price, granted, they're supposed to use the data anyway.
Right.
But if there's no sales price, then it leaves them a wider margin to go high or low.
Correct.
Whereas if there's a sales price, at least they have some idea of a target. Understanding, again, appraisal is not a 2 + 2 = 4 science.
Exactly.
It is more of an artistic. You could have 3 different appraisers appraise a property. and if it's not in escrow at a certain price, I can almost guarantee you all three appraisers will come up with three different values.
100%. You and I, Dave, have seen this happen over and over again. And if you get a good appraiser, because again, appraisers are like everything else. There's good real estate agents, there's good lenders, there's bad lenders and bad real estate agents, and it's the same thing with appraisers. There's ones that might just get out there and do a quick little, hey, I can make this happen, or no, I can't. And how many times have we had to have that, looked at again, or another appraiser come out and reappraise the property? Not a lot, but it does happen, right?
Well, and anytime, this is real estate, it's cars, it's jewelry, it's art. When you look at some of the prices that some people pay for art,
right,
and you look at it and you go, how do you appraise such a thing? And there's a simple definition I have, is the value of any given commodity is essentially defined by what bidders are willing to pay for it.
Correct. And something is worth what people are willing to pay for it.
Correct. And it'll vary depending on market.
Right.
So, you could have the very fact that you could have a house listed for sale and get 5 different offers at 5 different prices. It exemplifies the point that value is not a science. It's not an objective calculation.
Right.
Value is a very subjective decision. It's a very subjective animal.
Absolutely.
And it's largely artistic, and it all depends on, as they say, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
100%. And the first thing that comes to mind is views. This is something that's very subjective. And appraisers sometimes they could float one way or the other on these views. You got beautiful views. I mean, if you got just your basic average little neighborhood view, we're not talking a big deal here. We're talking, look, I got gorgeous canyon views, or I've got beach views, or ocean views, or city lightscape views. These are big things that are very subjective, and an appraiser they want to try to push something up, they can go to that view, right, to be a little bit more subjective. I've seen where I was at one of my listings, and I had an appraiser. I met the appraiser there. He came in. He was giving good value in the house. And then we talked about the view, because there actually was a really nice view that you can see out of some mountains and things of that nature. He looks out the window and he says, here's the challenge why I'm not going to give you a strong view jump or bump up, I think he called it. Because in this view, my view is obstructed with power lines. I'm looking out, I see a nice view in the background, but closer up, I'm seeing power lines come through here. And they're off in a distance. I'm looking at them. I'm trying to sell this appraiser on. Look at, they're so far back. I mean, really? I mean, come on. If maybe your vision is really strong, Mr. Appraiser, and those things are standing out to you for some reason because you had a dream of power lines last night. I don't know. I'm trying to work every angle here, but it didn't work. He said, nope, power lines are obstructing my view. So we're going to go ahead and not give it that view bump, right? We still made things happen and work because we had some different upgrades in the house and a couple other things going for us. So it all worked out at the end of the day. And it was a market where the buyer did want to pay. And you and I, Dave, know we personally worked with some buyers that bought homes that paid well over appraised value, because when you're buying custom homes, buying and selling custom homes, that gets very subjective and very tricky, right?
I think in an extreme case, there was an escrow that I recall one time where I think the purchase price was 1.7, the appraised value came in at 1.4, and the client purchased it for 1.7.
Yes.
That was an escrow that it was your client and I did the financing.
Correct.
And that was, I seem to recall, that was probably the largest gap I can recall.
That was a large gap.
But the escrow still closed and the buyer paid that price.
And the house that they bought for 1.7 was well worth it. That was a very nice house. That was a really nice house.
And here's the ultimate, is regardless of what you or I or the appraiser might have felt it was worth.
Correct.
The buyer felt it was worth 1.7, and that's what they paid.
Right.
Regardless of what the appraisal came in at.
100%. And there's other things too that are very subjective, like, are you off the street? Do you have RV parking or boat parking? Is it enough to park a big RV in there or a smaller RV? These things come into play too. Is it easy access? The position of the property. Is it just set in the road with all the other houses? The topography, right? Is it just a straight flat road, or are we talking hilly and curvy? Hilly and curvy seems to be the preferred topography that adds more value to your property. You can see the views and things of that nature, and your houses are not just stacked like this, right? Like in your basic tract housing community, that's going to be the worst one, if you will. Worst may be the wrong word there, but it's going to be on the lower end of the spectrum. The windy, curvy topography or ocean views or beach views and mountain views, these things, they're going to add value to an appraisal every time. So anyways, I hope that shed a little bit of light on the appraisal thing and valuation. Coming up with that listing price on your home is huge. One of the most important things you could do is come up with the right price on your home. Again, three styles of pricing. You got the aspirational pricing, setting it up higher, seeing, hey, if we get somebody really interested, great. And some people want to list it higher because they want to negotiate down. And then we have that value, the market value range. We get a range of market value, what homes like yours have been and are selling for and or listed currently because you're competing against those homes, right? So there's that market value. And then there's the below market value or auction type pricing, which is going to get a lot of excitement and it's going to get people coming like this. We're going to get your home sold quickly and typically over the asking price. The asking price is a marketing tool. This is just a price that we're putting on the property. So you put it too high, you're rolling the dice on that one. You could definitely be sitting. Again, days on market goes up. People's perception of your property value might be going down at the same time. So something to think about. Come up with the right price. Hiring an appraiser may not be the best way, but if you've got no idea what the value is, don't go and rely on just a Zillow's estimate. You've got to get multiple sources of numbers to look at to come up with that true valuation. A good local real estate agent is definitely going to be your best option on that. But if you're a for sale by owner, you probably don't want to go that route. Some of these people will pay money to go put it in the MLS and think that that's going to be everything. No, you don't just go put it in the MLS. That might be part of the reason why some people decide to sell it by themselves, because there's agents out there that don't put much time or effort or skill set into inputting things in the MLS correctly, along with the pictures, which better be professionally done. And I mean really good professional photography. There's professional photographers, and then there's real good ones. And there's agents that'll go and meet the photographer there to make sure things are being done right, like staging the house, getting everything set correctly, decluttering, depersonalizing, staging, getting it all set up, and then making sure that photographer is seeing the same angles and vision that the agent has in mind to sell that property, right? So a lot going into that. I know I'm talking a while a minute here. I hope that helps. Of course, anybody out there has any questions and wants me to elaborate on that, please call me anytime, or Dave with Lending. And also, please do me a favor, make sure you subscribe to this channel so we can keep you up to date on all kinds of things. We're going to give you insight from behind the scenes in the lending world and the real estate world. And I hope that helps everybody out. Dave, thanks so much again for being with us once again tonight, man.
Well, my pleasure for having me, brother. And the thing that as I say at the end of our podcast very often, our overall goal, you as a realtor, me as a lender, and us as a team, is not one transaction. It's relationship based, so that overall, from a relationship perspective, we present ourselves as a resource to the clients. So right. All things real estate, all things to do with the real estate side, all things to do with the financial side, we present ourselves as a resource for the long run, just like your doctor or your lawyer or your CPA.
Absolutely.
Thanks again for having me.
I'm sure I could have multiple past clients of ours will tell you that if they reach out to years after, we still are like that. We get the answers to them right away if they need anything. Okay, so that's super important. Again, Dave, thanks so much again, man. I want to wish you a great weekend. And next time, don't miss the Tyson fight, okay?
I will. Well, to quote you, it looks like I didn't miss too much, but I'll make sure I don't miss it next time either, man. Thank you for that.
Dave, you're smart, man. You're a smart guy. That's why I like working with you.
I was listening to you.
All right, pal.
Take care, brother.